Well, each spring, the question comes up, how much should I water my vegetables? How much should I water my plants? And that's a great question because either side of the spectrum is not good. If they get too much water and they're saturated, that's cutting off any of the air, the oxygen that's needed down in those roots, and they don't do well. If there's not enough, we all know if we don't get hydration, if we don't get water, we're not going to do well. And you see that very quickly within a week or two with these plants. So, again, those are two factors that we have to consider. We don't want to overwater, we don't want to underwater. And then the other thing is if you're in an outside situation, if you look behind me, we have some high tunnels. So the water there simply has to be provided by an irrigation system. In our case, it's a drip line system. If they're outside, you may live in an area that gets a lot of rain. You may live in the southeast, although they can go through droughts too. You may live in Mississippi or Georgia or Florida, and you get consistent rainfall. And in those situations, again, you have to judge to see how much water they need. There may have been a rainy week, like right now, for the first time in a couple of months, we're getting a little bit of rain. So I don't need to touch anything on my outside plants. So that's a factor. Again, you may live in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of California, where it is very dry and all the water that those plants are getting are provided by you, whether drip lines, soaker hoses, overhead watering system, however it's done. So we come back to the question, how do we know if we have enough water for our plants? And again, that depends a little bit on the plant too. If we're trying to get something to germinate, for example, carrots, they have to stay moist and wet the entire time or those seedlings will not germinate. So germination is one thing. Once these plants are out in their rows, as you see behind me, then they have to have a consistent watering, not over, not under, and it comes back to how much do they need. Well, if it's okra, mature okra that can be up to 7 foot tall, there's going to be times when they're going to need extra water because they're a bigger plant. If it is tomato plants, that's going to be a very large, thirsty fruit that's going to require a certain amount of water each week. So those are things you have to pay attention to as well. Read up on those particular vegetables and plants before you plant them, see what their water needs are. If you have things like squash, there's going to be 2 or 3 times a week. If there's been no rain, they're going to need water. But let me show you the ultimate thing that I have always found and works. And the thing I'll tell you, there is no perfect formula except for one way to be able to know if you have enough water. So as I go out each week and I look at my rows, I can see pretty much how they look on the surface. I can see this compost and see if it has a wet look about it. And that's going to tell me that there is some surface water there, that it is damp. And of course, this is easy because we've had rain. But during the week, as the week goes along, you're in a week that's dry, there's been no rain. The one surefire method to know is you're going to have to get your hand, put a finger down in that soil, and see how it feels. So what I always do is I walk over to these rows. These are bush beans. In this example, I come in and I can just take my finger and go down. And if I feel a wetness down 2-3 inches, then I know that those roots are getting the moisture that they need. And really, that's the one thing you have to do is you have to go out, get your finger down in that soil. And that's why I tell you there is no perfect formula to tell you for watering, except keep up with the particular plant that you're raising. Again, larger plants that are taking lots of water. And I use the example of tomatoes. I use the example of radishes. Radishes like water. And you can get an idea fairly after one season, if you've never done this before, you can tell when things start to wilt a little bit. You can tell when there's a dryness there. They're not really growing. They're not really prospering as they should. You know that they don't have enough water. Again, if you start to get browning leaves, things start to wilt down after you've watered a lot, they're probably getting too much water. The very first season that I raised Swiss chard, I almost killed the whole thing because I was overwatering. The moment that I cut it back down, in this more arid, we're a little bit of an arid climate, I cut it down to about once to twice a week. That Swiss chard came back and did really well. And then the next thing, as I said, I reach down into that soil, get the feeling of what it feels like 2, 3 inches down. And then you know if you've got moisture there, then your roots are getting water. It's very simple, but it can be a daunting question because I will tell you, even in this market garden that we've been doing for several years, I always have a question in my mind: have I watered enough? Have I watered too much? But again, going in and testing with your hand is the best thing to do. So, blessings over you, your family, your garden. We know you're going to do great this spring. Those are just little tips. It's not complicated, but it's little tips that can take you further along in the gardening process, and it's simple. We always like to have more material that's going to educate, take you further along in this garden process. We have a couple of videos on the screen. Check those out. Thanks for following. Thanks for prescribing. We appreciate you so much. Talk to you soon from Whirlwind Family Farm.